Hello, my name is David Rutstein. I'm a family physician and public health expert. Most of my career, 24 years in fact, was spent in the U.S. Public Health Service working for the federal government, assigned to some unusual locations. For 13 years, I was assigned to Micronesia, small islands in the Pacific, as a clinician. After which I came back for 11 years and worked in Washington, D.C., administering and running various federal health programs. Ultimately, I retired as the Deputy Surgeon General of the United States, after which I accepted a position running a private healthcare system in China for 5 years. However, I recently returned and have now started a foundation called Soul Health. Living in the seacoast, I'm here today to speak to you about cardiovascular disease. You know, cardiovascular disease is the #1 killer of Americans. It results in not only many deaths, but incapacitates many people before they die. It results in huge numbers of encounters with physicians and invasive and non-invasive procedures, and it accounts for some of the most commonly performed procedures in America. For instance, coronary artery bypass graft is the most common surgery now performed in America. So, what can we do about cardiovascular disease? Why is it causing such a burden to Americans? Well, there have been a lot of studies done to try and figure out how we can better prevent cardiovascular disease in the first place, how we can identify those people who have cardiovascular disease early on, and how we can better treat cardiovascular disease once it's identified. And what do I mean by cardiovascular disease? It basically means disease of the heart and the blood vessels. So the kinds of things that kill people in America from cardiovascular origin is heart attacks, strokes, congestive heart failure, arrhythmias or the heartbeat is no longer regular, and that can cause problems. Diseases of the blood vessels, like the aorta, the largest blood vessel in the body. Diseases of peripheral arteries in the arms and legs, and also diseases of the veins. Combined, these diseases account for a significant amount of impairment for both individuals and populations of individuals. And as a consequence, it accounts for probably the greatest amount of healthcare expenditures we have in America. Let's talk first about prevention. Turns out that what we eat and what we do accounts for probably most of the reasons why we develop cardiovascular disease. Diets high in fats are probably the single greatest cause of cardiovascular disease. But more recent research has shown that even a greater producer of cardiovascular disease is diets that contain animal-based proteins. What do I mean by this? Proteins that come from meat, proteins that come from eggs, proteins that come from dairy products actually cause inflammation in the lining of the arteries of our body. That inflammation leads to the buildup of plaques, usually containing some cholesterol and other products, these plaques can rupture, leading to things like heart attacks, strokes, and also occlusion of arteries in our neck, arms, and legs. So the simplest way to prevent cardiovascular disease, though actually doing it is not so simple, is to avoid eating animal products. Avoid meat, fish, eggs, and dairy. Now, that sounds radical to some, but I believe in the future we will look back and chuckle that people were actually eating these things for centuries before we realized that they caused such severe disease. We are now paying the price for that in terms of the high incidence of cardiovascular disease. So that's one thing that we can do to prevent cardiovascular disease. The second has to do with exercise. The more we remain active physically in our daily activities, the more we reduce the effects of inflammation on the lining of our arteries, the more we increase the muscular strength of our heart, and the lower we are susceptible to the effects of any cardiovascular disease that has already started. So this means getting at least 150 minutes of exercise, aerobic exercise, per week. Those people that get that much exercise generally remain safe from most cardiovascular diseases. And it's never too late to begin. The third thing most people already know, and that is avoiding tobacco in any form. Currently, about 23 to 24% of Americans still smoke, even though everyone knows it causes severe disease. Most people say, well, I'm not going to get lung cancer. Well, that's true. Smoking does cause lung cancer, but more importantly, it causes cardiovascular disease, and it exacerbates all the other stimulators of cardiovascular disease. So again, the answer is never start smoking, and if you have started smoking or using tobacco in any form, stop right away. Let's talk now about screening for people with cardiovascular disease. All adults should be screened for cardiovascular disease, all adults in America. This can be as simple as taking your blood pressure and having a physical examination, having an electrocardiogram. These are simple techniques for screening for cardiovascular disease. If your blood pressure is already too high, having it treated so the blood pressure becomes normal, because blood pressure itself is a risk factor for cardiovascular disease. If your heart rate is irregular, taking appropriate steps to have it become more regular is very important. This may mean medications. It also may mean a certain dietary restriction and exercise program. Finally, how do we treat cardiovascular disease? Well, depending on the cardiovascular disease that you have, which organs are affected, the treatment will change. But generally, treatments begin with the least invasive necessary to achieve the goal. Your doctor can help you to decide on which cardiovascular disease treatment is right for you. But the takeaway from this is it's never too late to change your diet, to get more exercise, and to stop smoking while maintaining a normal blood pressure. All of these things alone can also reduce the severity of cardiovascular disease that already exists. I hope this has been a helpful glimpse into cardiovascular disease and how to prevent, screen, and treat it. Stay healthy.